Hello and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. The United States and Iran are scheduled to sign a peace deal later this week, but disputes appear to remain over several key issues, including transit fees through the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. President Donald Trump projected confidence about the agreement as he met with world leaders in France at the G7 summit. Oil prices plunged to a 3-month low amid hopes that the U.S. Iran peace deal could end the energy supply crisis. Stock markets on Wall Street also rallied, with the Dow rising by about 1% at market close to hit a record high. President Lee Jae-myung met with Pope Leo for the first time at the Vatican and invited the Pope to Seoul for a major Catholic camp event in 2027. During their closed-door meeting, he is also believed to have asked the pontiff to visit North Korea. We begin this morning with the latest on the peace deal between the United States and Iran. Details of the MOU that's going to be signed on Friday have not yet been released, but both sides are already showing some splits over some details. Our Kim Bo-kyung starts us off.
U.S. President Donald Trump has said a preliminary deal to end the war with Iran has already been signed and suggested that the details of the agreement are set to be published pretty soon. Such remarks came while he was speaking on Monday alongside French President Emmanuel Macron ahead of this week's G7 meeting in France.
I'm very happy to say when it's signed, the deal's all signed. This is a very powerful document, and I want it to be released, so probably pretty soon. I would say sometime after Friday.
Though Trump says the agreement has been reached, differences between the two sides are already emerging. One point both sides agree on is that once the MOU is signed, the Strait of Hormuz will reopen and the U.S. blockade will be lifted. The key question is whether commercial vessels will once again be able to pass through the Strait of Hormuz freely without paying additional fees. While Trump said there would be no transit fees, Iran's semi-official Fars news agency reported that Iran's right to collect transit fees in the Strait of Hormuz had been recognized. Another differing point, even within the U.S., is when the strait will be fully reopened. Trump said it will open on Friday.
When it's signed, the deal's all signed, and the strait is already partially opened, as you know, but it's essentially ships are starting to go out Now on Friday it'll be completely open.
A senior U.S. official, however, reportedly said in a briefing that though maritime traffic would increase substantially, a return to normal operations within 2 weeks is unlikely. The U.S. and Iran also seem to have some differences regarding the release of frozen Iranian assets. While Iran maintains that some of its frozen assets should be released immediately upon the signing of the MOU, the U.S. has made it clear that it cannot release frozen assets simply upon the signing, as any release of frozen assets and sanctions relief must be linked to the scope and implementation of Iran's nuclear disarmament commitments. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
And global markets surged and oil prices plunged on Monday after the United States and Iran reached a deal to extend their ceasefire and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Investors cheered the prospect of easing Middle East tensions, sending major U.S. stock indexes higher for a third straight session, while crude prices fell to a 3-month low. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
Global markets rallied on Monday, and oil prices fell sharply after the United States and Iran reached an agreement to extend their ceasefire and reopen the Strait of Hormuz, a critical route for global oil shipments. Investors welcomed the development as a sign that tensions in the Middle East may be easing, raising hopes for greater stability in energy markets and lower inflation pressures worldwide. On Monday, all 3 major U.S. stock indexes advanced for a third straight session. The S&P 500 climbed 1.7%, while the Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 468 points, or 0.9%. The Nasdaq Composite jumped 3.1%, led by strong gains in semiconductor shares. The Philadelphia Semiconductor Index also continued to hit record highs, as investors poured into chip makers on optimism surrounding artificial intelligence and improving geopolitical conditions. Oil prices moved in the opposite direction. Crude futures fell more than 4% on Monday as traders responded to the ceasefire agreement and the prospect of uninterrupted oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz. Brent crude for August delivery settled at $83.20 a barrel, down 4.9% from the previous session. Meanwhile, West Texas Intermediate crude for July delivery closed at $80.75 a barrel, a decline of 4.8%. Both benchmarks recorded their lowest closing levels since March, when tensions involving Iran first began escalating. The market reaction followed reports that U.S. President Donald Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, and Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf had electronically signed a memorandum of understanding formally endorsing the ceasefire. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The reopening of the Strait of Hormuz may have been announced, but the effects of the conflict between the United States and Iran on global energy markets are far from over. Our correspondent Park Gun-woo spoke with a senior official at the International Energy Agency about the road ahead and its implications for South Korea.
The normalization of global energy markets could still take many months. That's according to Tim Gould, Chief Energy Economist at the International Energy Agency, speaking following the declaration of an end to hostilities between the U.S. and Iran.
If you just look at the sailing times from the Middle East to markets around the world, I mean, to get to Korea takes the best part of 3 or 4 weeks. So in our view, it will take many, many months to get back to somewhere close to where we were prior to the conflict.
Gould also warned that energy markets may never fully return to their pre-conflict state.
And in some ways, we may never get back to the situation that we had in February, because there is also the question of confidence in the strait, and that confidence is now quite fragile. So people will have in their mind that the strait has been closed once, perhaps it will close again.
That comes as fuel importing countries are likely to reassess their energy security strategies, following months of disruptions to global oil and gas flows. So South Korea relies heavily on energy imports. So what lessons do you think South Korea can earn from the recent crisis?
First golden rule of energy security, and that is diversification. Diversification of routes, diversification of suppliers, diversification of the energy mix, because wherever we see high levels of concentration in the energy system. That comes with some risks.
Gold said the crisis could accelerate investment in renewable and nuclear energy, while also speeding up the shift toward what he calls the age of electricity.
If you are using electricity, domestically produced electricity, that displaces then your need for oil imports. Korea is very well placed in some of those areas because it does have, a very well developed ecosystem for example, for battery production, for all sorts of areas of technology development.
The IEA Economist also highlighted Korea's role as a key partner in future energy security discussions.
As we move on from this crisis, there will be a lot of discussions about how countries can safeguard their energy security interests in this new environment that we are in. And we are looking to Korea as a leader in some of those initiatives.
He added that the Middle East conflict could reshape how countries view energy security and energy transitions, saying the world is entering a new era of energy discussions. 박건우, Arirang News, Paris.
Korea's export prices rose for an 11th straight month in May, driven by strong global demand for memory chips and non-ferrous metals linked to growing investment in artificial intelligence. According to the Bank of Korea on Tuesday, the export price index climbed 0.3% from April to 188.58. While the monthly increase slowed, export prices were nearly 47% higher than a year earlier. Meanwhile, import prices fell 0.3% for a second consecutive month as lower international oil prices reduced the cost of imported mining products, coal, and petroleum goods. Now, for more on this, we're joined today by Professor Oh Jun-seok, Dean at the College of Economics and Business at Sookmyung Women's University. Professor, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
So, global oil prices fell after the United States and Iran announced a ceasefire deal, but many energy experts say it could take months before oil and gas supplies return to normal. Why is this, and does this mean consumers will have to wait longer before actually seeing lower oil prices and costs for food and other goods?
High oil and gasoline prices are energy supply problems won't be solved overnight. It will be likely take months before energy companies can restore its operations to the level of the normalcy. Ships loaded with crude oil have been stranded in the Persian Gulf for more than 3 months, through which about 1/5 of the world's oil and gasoline supply typically traveled before the war began. The slow pace of shipping and refining crude oil and doubts about the security of traveling through the strait imply the effect won't be seen immediately. In addition, most physical oil and gas volumes are traded on long-term forward contract, which means signed months in advance. In this way, consumers must wait longer because businesses are currently selling inventory produced and stored in older, more expensive energy. As fertilizer, a byproduct of oil, has already in cost, putting pressure on farmers. Global food prices could also be helped if the supplies of fertilizer get closer to the normal level again. And jet fuel, another byproduct of oil traded in Northwest Europe, has already seen a small fall in prices. Next wave will be a monetary contraction. The Iran war has affected economies around the world as the jump in energy cost has pushed up fuel prices, leading to a pickup in inflation. This has pressure on central banks in most countries to raise interest rates with tightening monetary policy to keep inflation under control.
I see. And the U.S. dollar also weakened against major currencies after the ceasefire was announced. Could this also pave the way for the Korean won to strengthen against the dollar and potentially move below the 1,500 won level? And what risks could still keep exchange rate volatility elevated?
Yes, as you mentioned, the U.S. dollar index measuring the greenback against a basket of currencies, including the euro, yen, and pound, has shown near multi-year lows. As for Korean won, in spite of a continued increase in export and investment, sparked by a strong performance of the semiconductor and IT sectors especially, contrary to the weakening trend of the U.S. dollar, the $1 exchange rate continues to above 1,500 ranges. This might be mainly due to safe haven demand and corporate dollar holding under the high exposure to global uncertainty. And the U.S. Iran framework agreement to restore passage through the Strait of Hormuz could probably cool the global panic of buying dollars as time goes. However, as I experienced when I was at practice in the period of financial crisis, at this time, most dealers fearing consecutive extreme fluctuations, then believing that dollar is the king. And so the Korean export firms are refusing to convert their dollar earnings back into one, starving at the local foreign exchange market of supply. So, accordingly, regulatory intervention and crackdown follows as usual. Bank of Korea and Financial Supervisory Board, they recently launched their joint inspection of foreign exchange banks to root out speculative trading, so-called artificial dollar holding. Despite the positive momentum of Korean economy, private sector is counting on another risk factor, which will not be changed easily. That is capital outflow. Continued trend of this kind of market, diversification by individual retail traders and national pension services create a permanent and structural demand for dollar. That is the weakest point of working against won appreciation. It could have been worse. Korea's economy will likely grow at a sharper than expected pace of 2.5% this year, thanks to strong export.
And the U.S. Federal Reserve is set to make its policy decision later this week. And with the ceasefire now in place, many analysts believe the Fed is less likely to raise rates. Why has this outlook shifted, and what implications could this have for monetary policy in other major economies?
Yes, U.S. Federal Reserve is less likely to raise rate because the ceasefire reduced the threat of energy-related stagflation. The U.S. Federal Reserve is expected to hold its benchmark interest rate steady at 3.5% to a 3.75% range. Why has the outlook shifted? Global factors such as commodity price and equity markets were the primary driver of foreign exchange movement earlier this year. More recently, domestic factors in the United States, including the interest rate differentials, have begun to play a larger role in determining currency performance. Prior to the ceasefire, surging West Texas Intermediate crude price had pushed the Fed officials to actively consider rate hikes. The reopening of the Strait of Hormuz to diffuse a major supply side shock. What implications could we have? Hikes are highly effective against the demand-driven inflation, but raising rates into a geopolitical risk will be likely to induce a severe recession as a result. When the Fed raises rates, it consequently triggers capital flight and depreciate emerging markets and the European currencies on and on over big waves follows. Thus, in short, at this moment, a steady Fed rate will be an answer to calm down volatility and then reduce downward pressure on these currencies. Global easing imported inflation concerns.
I see. All right, Professor, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for your insight today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
President Lee Jae-myung, who's on a 10-day trip to Europe, has met Pope Leo XIV for the first time. He invited the Pope to Seoul for a major Catholic camp event next year and discussed regional peace with the spiritual leader. Our Yoon Jung-min is traveling with the president and reports from Rome.
The South Korean first couple was given a warm welcome at the Vatican. In their first meeting on Monday, a one-on-one that lasted for about half an hour, President Lee Jae-myung invited Pope Leo XIV to South Korea for World Youth Day Seoul 2027.
The leaders agreed to closely cooperate for the success of World Youth Day Seoul 2027. President Yi politely invited Leo XIV to visit South Korea on the occasion.
Regional peace was a key topic between the president and the spiritual leader.
The president explained to the Pope our people's desire and government's vision for peace on the Korean peninsula, and they reaffirmed the Vatican's unwavering support for peace and reconciliation on the peninsula.
Details were undisclosed, but it seems as though President Yi also might have asked the Pope to pay a visit to North Korea. When meeting Cardinal Lazaro Yuhung-sik last year, Yi said he hoped the Pope could stop by North Korea during his trip to Seoul. Meeting the press corps, the Cardinal said whether the visit actually happens or not depends on the North regime.
I think it depends on the North. It's the one that has to invite the Pope and create conditions.
A senior Blue House official said President Yi vowed to continue working to improve inter-Korean ties while acknowledging that it may take time and patience. As Yi reportedly cited a line from the Bible, "Knock at the door and it will be opened." The Holy See stressed the importance of hope. The Korean leader presented the Pope with a sculpture representing God's embrace, referring to the prodigal son from the Gospel, and the Pope gifted the president with a message for the 59th World Day of Peace. Concluding his visit to the Vatican, President Yi will head to France to attend the G7 summit, where world leaders are set to address a host of global challenges. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News, Rome.
In meeting the Korean community in Italy, President Lee Jae-myung has promised to improve the overseas voting system as quickly as possible. He said he takes it very seriously that some overseas Koreans could not exercise their voting rights due to certain administrative issues. The president also promised a better system for Korean nationals adopted overseas when they try to find their origins or families to ensure that they stay connected to their motherland. The South Korean national football team has completed its first full squad training session since arriving in Guadalajara, Mexico. Led by head coach Hong Myung-bo, South Korea trained on Monday, 3 days ahead of its second Group A match at the 2026 FIFA World Cup against Mexico. Midfielder Bae Jun-ho and defender Kim Tae-hyun, both recovering from injuries, rejoined team training, allowing all 26 players to take part in a full session together for the first time since the squad arrived in Guadalajara. Bae has suffered an ankle injury during a friendly against Trinidad and Tobago in May, while Kim injured ligaments in his left ankle during training 2 days before Korea's victory over Czechia.
Good morning, I'm Choo Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. Russia launched its largest drone and missile barrage of the war overnight on Monday, killing 11 people and setting fire to the roof of an 11th century monastery in Kyiv that UNESCO calls one of Eastern Orthodox Christianity's most sacred landmarks. More than 680 drones and missiles targeted Kyiv and the cities of Kharkiv and Dnipro, hours after President Zelensky and Vladimir Putin separately spoke by phone with President Trump. Ukraine's air defenses intercepted 632 aerial targets. 5 people were killed in Kyiv, including in strikes on apartment buildings and a market. The Kyiv-Perchesk Lavra, also known as the Monastery of the Caves, suffered significant damage. Zelensky called it Russia's, quote, biggest crime yet against Christian culture and urged G7 leaders meeting in France to deliver a decisive response. In the U.S., 8 crew members have been killed in a crash involving an Air Force B-52 Stratofortress bomber shortly after takeoff from Edwards Air Force Base in Southern California's Mojave Desert on Monday. The 8-engine bomber went down at 11:20 in the morning while on a test mission roughly 100 miles north of Los Angeles. Officials at the airbase said the crash was, quote, not survivable and that emergency crews had been sent to the scene to account for all personnel. Aerial footage of the crash site showed a charred area roughly the size of a football field. The incident is the first crash of the nuclear-capable B-52 aircraft since 2016. In the UK, children under 16 will be banned from accessing social media platforms, including TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube, Facebook, and X from spring 2027. Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced the move on Monday in one of the most sweeping restrictions on children's internet use by any major democracy. The government said legislation would pass before Christmas, with the ban taking effect early next year. Age verification will be required for over 16s wishing to continue using the platforms. U.S. President Donald Trump hosted the first professional sporting event ever held at the White House on Sunday as part of the nation's 250th anniversary. The 7-fight UFC card on the South Lawn came hours after Trump announced a peace agreement with Iran. 4,000 guests watched the fights, including military personnel, corporate sponsors, and political allies, but tickets were not sold to the public. Underdog Justin Gaethje defeated Ilia Topuria to claim the UFC lightweight championship in the main event.
It feels like we have jumped right into the middle of summer from last week's pleasant late spring warmth. The heat has intensified since the weekend, bringing sizzling temperatures to many regions. And Seoul could see a new record this afternoon. And strong sunshine will add to the heat today. UV levels are expected to reach very high levels in most parts of Korea. So if you're heading outdoors, be sure to protect yourself from the sun with a hat, umbrella, and sunglasses. Then there is a chance of passing rain in Gyeonggi-do province and mountainous areas of Gangwon-do and Jeollado provinces with 5 to 20 millimeters in the forecast. Lastly, checking on today's highs, Seoul will be getting up to 33 degrees Celsius, Gwangju to 32 degrees, Daejeon topping out at 32 as well. Stay hydrated and take care.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.
He bursts into laughter upon unexpectedly discovering an incense burner on a street in Insadong. What made him laugh was none other than a replica of the Celadon incense burner with openwork geometric design, often hailed as the pinnacle of Goryeo Celadon. Its clear, luminous jade green glaze, and even the 3 adorable rabbits supporting the burner. At first glance, it seems quite convincing, but it cannot escape his keen eye. Perhaps, unable to support the burner, the rabbits in the replica are oversized and clumsy. In reality, the rabbits on the authentic piece are as small as the joints of an adult's finger. They have borne the weight of layered lotus petals and an openwork lid for over 1,000 years. This incense burner is also considered a masterpiece that showcases the refined and exceptional craftsmanship of the Goryeo dynasty. Each delicate petal was individually shaped and attached, and the precise openwork technique, carved to allow incense smoke to rise like drifting clouds, stands as clear evidence. Above all, it embodies a remarkable sense of balance that is difficult to perfectly recreate even with modern techniques. It is, in essence, a complete convergence of the decorative techniques of its time. It can be imitated, but never truly matched, the unwavering dedication of Goryeo artisans. The laughter in Insadong may well have been the most honest expression of awe for the extraordinary artistic spirit of our ancestors, so far ahead of their time.
We're here to bring a new type of news show.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Bringing news just for you. It's Tuesday, June 16th here in Seoul. I'm Ijujin, and this is News Generation. Joining today is Cheska.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. So fabulous with us.
Happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday. And both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. So we're already on day 2 of the work week, and while many of us are busy checking off our to-do list, one expense continues to take a big bite out of our monthly budgets, which is none other than housing. From rent and mortgage payments to maintenance fees, where we live often shapes not only our finances, but also our quality of life. So all three of us currently live in one of the most expensive cities, Seoul. So, Cheska, how much of your income actually goes into housing?
Oh my God. So I do the monthly rent. In Korea, we call it 월세, in the very central part of the city. So previously, I would spend almost 1/3 to, I don't want to admit it, but sometimes it would go up very hefty to about half of my income, because the building that I used to live in was very fancy, it was very new, it was right at the center of Gangnam, and we also had a maintenance fee that you had to pay to maintain the entire building.
That would definitely bring it up.
Right. In Korea, we call that office still, but I think it's more like a condominium in the American version. So I actually did a wiser thing and moved slightly out of the central part of the city, but have bigger rooms, slightly older house. So now about 25%, I would say, 20 to 25. Yeah.
It's crazy how much prices differ depending on where you live. Yeah. So what about you, Fabian?
I'm also slightly outside of the center and part of the where's the community. So I'm paying 25% to 30%, and I wouldn't necessarily invest 50% of my wealth into housing.
That's smart.
If anything, I would just raise it up a little bit when it comes to finding a better neighborhood or changing opportunities.
So it really depends on what you actually think is important. And our experience here isn't unique. Many young people in Seoul seem to be facing similar challenges, and that really helps put the housing affordability issue into perspective. And that's why we're going to talk more about this. But first, let's take a look at the screen. For many young people, housing has long been their biggest financial burden, so much so that owning a home remains one of their biggest dreams. But as housing supply struggles to keep up with the strong demand in Seoul, that dream is becoming increasingly difficult to achieve. Today on News Generation, we take a closer look at the housing challenges facing young people, explore how urban housing shortages are affecting cities around the world, and examine possible solutions to make housing more affordable and accessible. Just as we saw in a video, for many young people, finding an affordable place to live is becoming increasingly difficult. So let's start by looking at why the housing crunch is hitting the younger generations especially hard. So Jessica, can you tell us why young people are feeling the housing crisis more than other generations?
Yeah, I think first and foremost it has to do with cost, because with the rising housing cost as well as rental prices have pushed the number of people who do not own a home in the 20s and 30s to nearly 1 million, which is actually the highest on record. If you think about it, housing costs have also risen sharply relative to income. So before we started, both Fabio and I shared that we spend about 25 to 30% portion of our income on the house, which is already a lot of pressure. So as of the third quarter of last year, housing expenses for young household heads were up 12% from an earlier. So it can feel like a huge burden and pressure when a large portion of your income has to go into housing. Also in Korea, we have this system called jeonse, which is a long-term deposit lease. So what you do is you put down a large sum of money all up front when you rent a house for anywhere up to like 2 to 10 plus years. And recently the market has been facing the shortage of these jeonse rentals. So let's take a look at the screen. Now, as you can see, in less than 6 months, from December of last year to May, jeonse rental supply dropped by over 4,700 houses. Now, given that there was less than 13,000 houses to begin with at the end of 2025, I think that is a pretty big drop, leaving renters with fewer housing options and much higher costs.
And that's why it's causing a lot of concern, because a lot of young people have to turn to jeonse. They have no choice. So when rent takes up such a large share of your income, it can affect nearly every major life decision. And the question is, what does that pressure then look like in everyday life? So, Fabi, how is the housing crisis affecting young people's daily lives?
I think young people are torn between the idea of just buying a house and renting. But what are the problems of buying a house? You know, you're investing part of your wealth into an asset for personal use that doesn't generate any type of passive income. And at the same time, it also ties you to a specific place, so it doesn't give you mobility or flexibility. So that becomes the first problem. But when it comes to renting, the other problem is the fact that rent prices are becoming higher every second. And so when we talk about rent, according to a survey from a media outlet, for single-use houses here in Seoul, we are finding that the average is 800,000 Korean won, which is around $530 US. And when you switch it to another currency, you might think that is a little bit affordable.
Exactly.
But in the context of Seoul, 800,000 Korean won is a lot. And also the other problem is that supply remains limited. So the city keeps expanding and people are looking for opportunities outside of the capital city, but that is just not enough, because as many analysts point out, it does become a structural problem. and there's not a lot of job opportunities outside of the city of Seoul, and there's a lot of problems also related to speculation when it comes to real estate. So commuting time and choosing the perfect neighborhood also becomes a very big factor for people when it comes to choosing the perfect place to stay at. So even if you tell people, oh, just live outside of the capital city, it's just not going to work, because for a lot of people, and especially when it comes to societal pressure, sometimes a specific place, a specific area carries a lot of not only symbolism, but also opportunities.
And reputation too, in some cases.
There's prestige tied to certain areas.
Exactly.
Especially
So,
the 3 districts in Gangnam.
even for me as a foreigner living outside of Seoul, my life would be completely different than living in Seoul. And so in that case, you know, sometimes we are seeing demand and supply problems, but it makes a lot of sense socially because people just want to live in specific places.
So obviously housing is such a big thing in Korea, but I'm guessing this isn't a challenge that's unique to our country. So what's the situation like in Spain then?
In Spain, we have a very complicated situation. It's about finding balance between considering housing as a civil right, but at the same time protecting the rights of homeowners who do have the right of choosing their own price and conditions for the houses that they are renting. Now, when it comes to Spain, we have to have in mind that it's a very popular country with tourists. So that means that short-term rentals such as Airbnbs are definitely much more profitable than just renting to locals.
That's very interesting because in Korea, that's not really a thing.
Exactly.
I guess in Spain, that also was contributing to the housing supply going down then.
And if you look at the infrastructure itself, most of the city centers tend to be very old. And so when you build new houses, they tend to be outside, in the outskirts of the city. So the city tends to be much more competitive in that sense. And at the same time, increasing housing supply may seem like one of the best options for tenants, but it's not necessarily beneficial for the competitive market when it comes to real estate, because for property owners, it does reduce a lot of returns. And then large-scale protests have been going on in Spain for the past few years. It's a very big issue, with hundreds of thousands expressing how this skyrocketing rents and also this real estate speculation is becoming a very big problem. According to the Bank of Spain, around 700,000 homes would be needed to keep up with the current demand. Yes, and the issue of illegal occupation also affects availability. Furthermore, according to the Spanish Youth Council, the average after-tax monthly salary is 1,190 euros. Now, the average monthly rent in cities like Madrid is going to be around 1,176 euros.
That's
so
very close.
If you do very quick math, this is 99% of a young person's salary.
That is a crazy number.
Of course, this depends on personal situation and region, and we cannot just pretty much say that this is the situation for millions of people. But it is true that it was quite eye-opening for me, and it made me realize why many of my friends living in Spain are struggling to find balance between paying rent and just having a life outside of their work.
Right. Do young people in Spain also want to live in like the capital cities or like the key areas like in Korea? Is that also happening in Spain?
I would say that every single city is becoming very popular. So it's not only Madrid and Barcelona.
Interesting.
But especially when it comes to city centers, because they tend to be very small, and that's where most of the opportunities are taking place, it does become very competitive.
So we're seeing like a low demand, high demand, low supply across the country.
Yes, I mean, if you're a tourist, you want to stay in the city center.
Yes, exactly.
If you're a local, you want to stay in the city center. So the competition is tough.
I see. So spending nearly an entire paycheck on rent is a situation that many would find unsustainable. And it shows just how widespread this issue has become across major cities around the world. So what other countries are facing then similar housing challenges, Jessica?
I mean, obviously Spain, and the housing crisis is definitely not limited to Seoul. But in fact, there are so many cities around the globe that are having these housing crisis issues, which leads to socio-economic crisis and challenges. So in Hong Kong, home prices are among the highest on the planet, while cities such as my dear home, New York, and San Francisco, London, and Tokyo continue to struggle with soaring housing costs and limited supply and sort of worsening affordability. Because for many young people, owning a home has become increasingly out of reach. Therefore, there's a lot of socio-economic issues that have also also happened, such as homelessness, which is also a very big issue in places like New York City, and people being pushed out of the city, and young people still living with parents are becoming much more common.
So it's remarkable that cities with very different economies and cultures are facing such similar housing pressures, and that suggests the causes and the solutions may be more global than we think. So to get a more personal and in-depth perspective on this, we're going to talk to someone who also lives in a city that has long battled a housing crisis. And that conversation will take place right after the break, so don't go anywhere.
NewsGen wants to hear from you. Go to YouTube and search out channel Arirang News. Click Posts and cast your vote in the poll. Make a new type of news with us.
To learn what the housing situation looks like beyond Korea, we're joined by Erin, a New Yorker experiencing the city's housing challenges firsthand. So hello, Erin. Thank you so much for connecting with us today.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Erin, so what does your current housing situation look like, and how difficult is it for young people in New York City to find affordable housing these days?
Yeah, so I currently live in Queens, which is a borough of New York City, and I have two roommates. We live in a 3-bedroom apartment, so we each have our own bedroom, but it is quite common, I would say, for young people our age to have more than one roommate. Similar to some of the hosts, I pay probably 25 to 30% of my income goes to rent. And I would say that the housing here is quite competitive. It kind of depends on what time of year you're looking for an apartment, but especially if you're looking kind of at the same time as graduation happens, when students are looking for housing, that kind of thing, it can be very, very competitive where you're applying to multiple apartments. You might not hear back from a lot of them. You might not get the apartment that you're really looking for. Additionally, it's quite common to live far from the city center to have a more affordable apartment. For me, it takes maybe 40 minutes to get into Manhattan to my job, which is quite common, I would say. And I think similar to a lot of other cities, you see a lot of locals being priced out of the neighborhoods that they grew up in because housing has just become so competitive, and I feel like every year it just becomes more and more expensive.
And as someone that lived in New York for 10 years, everything that you say is bringing back a lot of memories. But what are some of the biggest challenges do you think young people face because of high housing costs, especially in New York?
I would say, like I mentioned, there is generally a need to have roommates if you want if you want a larger space, if you want to live in a certain area, because a studio apartment can be incredibly expensive depending on where you're looking. That kind of comes with its own difficulties depending on if you have roommates that you know, or if you have to move into, a situation that maybe you don't know your roommates beforehand. I think I'm quite lucky. I do like my roommates. I feel like I said, every year the cost of living continues to go up, but that doesn't necessarily mean that your salary is increasing year to year. It's quite common here for landlords to raise the rent every single year. So if your salary is not increasing, sometimes you do have to move because you just can no longer afford the apartment you're living in. I know people who still live with their parents because of this. I know people who have even resorted to living in apartments that are not quite legal, like a basement apartment, or an apartment that's maybe in addition to a house that's not registered, which comes with risks, of course. And then it's not just the housing costs that are expensive as well. Utility costs can be quite high as well. And again, they keep going up every single year. Most of the young people that I know, and even myself, kind of have resigned to the fact that we're probably never going to own houses, especially because so much of your income does go towards, your rent. And then I think another risk is there's a lot of scams with when you're looking for apartments. So you do have to be kind of careful. A lot of apartments in New York will also charge application fees when you're applying to live in that apartment. So it's not even a set thing that you'll get that apartment. You're just paying like a fee to even put your name into the, into the ring. I even had an experience where when I was looking for an apartment just at the beginning of this year, the landlord wanted to charge each of myself and each of my roommates $50 each for the application fee. So we would have been paying $150 just to apply. And he said, oh, it's quite competitive. I've already had a lot of people who have applied. And we were thinking, why would we even apply then if you're not even like going to get the apartment? So I feel like all of those things together kind of make it quite a difficult situation in New York.
It makes sense that with everything becoming more expensive, people might want to profit as much as possible from this industry. But it sounds quite tough for renters. So in your experience, what would you think that are the main solutions for this housing crisis that could help ease this housing crisis?
I think, actually our mayor did unveil a new affordable housing plan for the next 5 years in New York. They're going to be building some new buildings that will be affordable housing. I do think that we kind of need even more than that because there are just so many people who are in need. I think a big issue in New York right now is that private equity firms, this might be unique to the US, I'm not sure, but a lot of private equity firms are buying up big blocks of buildings. And so it's making it so that, local people cannot own land. And that they are setting the rent prices higher and higher every single year. So that's a big issue. And I feel that some sort of limit on the purchasing of those companies might help as well as some limits to Airbnbs. That's also an issue in New York. And I think also having more protections for tenants will just help ease some of the pressure that we feel, especially when we're applying for apartments or trying to, if you find yourself in a living situation that is less than ideal, it helps to know that the city is at least, has your back.
Right. I mean, it's kind of bleak hearing about all these stories from Spain and New York, and also hearing how we're all struggling to find a place to live. So yeah, I mean, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we just spoke with a New Yorker who shared firsthand how rising housing costs are reshaping life for young people in one of the world's most expensive cities. And governments and the private sector are also exploring new ways to make housing more accessible. So what solutions are then being proposed in Korea and also in other countries, Jessica?
I think one of the most popular one that is happening right now is called co-living, and that is rapidly gaining popularity in Seoul. This housing model offers compact private rooms while placing greater emphasis on shared community spaces and really special amenities such as like rooftop lounges, co-working space. You have your own kitchen that you can share, and fitness center. And these shared facilities are very attractive to young residents. So despite quite high rent, it is becoming very popular, and the market has expanded quite quickly with investment in Seoul's co-living sector nearly doubling over the past year. Also, the government is publicly supporting private rental housing, and these developments offer long-term housing stability, and the rent increases are legally capped. So this also makes it a very attractive option for young people who have a lot of pressure on their wallets.
Right, just looking at the footage makes it clear that these are pretty good quality housing. So what are I'm sure other cities are doing things too. So what's some innovative solutions that we're seeing in other cities?
Well, less fancy solutions could be, for example, micro apartments. And you would guess that this small studios in Seoul might be part of it.
Yes.
But if you look at cities like New York, Tokyo, and especially Hong Kong, you have apartments where the floor area goes from 10 to 33 square meters. So they're very, very small. And at the same time, one example that I found very interesting was the modular housing system in Australia, which is basically prefabricated houses in sections that they are made inside a factory, and then they are transported to the final site just for assembly. So it was quite funny to watch videos online of people mentioning that it looks like Legos or Legos. because they have these giant cranes and they just transport the whole house and set it in a specific place.
So it's easier to make, I guess. So it's fascinating to see how cities are rethinking what housing can look like, whether that's shared living spaces, smaller but smarter apartments, or homes that can be built more quickly and also affordably. Of course, policymakers aren't the only ones weighing in on the issue, so we also wanted to hear directly from our viewers. So we ran a poll on the Arirang News YouTube channel asking which policy is most needed to address the urban housing shortage. And here's what the results showed. So nearly half of the respondents, 47%, chose expanding public housing, making it the most popular option. Another 21% said curbing speculative demand should be the priority, while 19% favored easing housing regulations to boost supply. Meanwhile, 13% supported promoting alternative housing models such as co-living spaces. So the results show there's no single solution, but expanding public housing clearly stands out as an option with the strongest public support. Of course, beyond policy innovation, everyone has their own vision of the ideal place to call home. So to close off our discussion on a more happier note, so if housing were affordable, what would your dream housing situation look like, Jessica?
I think the question itself is already quite dreamy, but if I may, I grew up in New Zealand, as you guys all know, so nature is a big part of my life. So still living in the city, but having at least some patch of garden or nature that I can call my own.
That sounds nice.
I think would be dream, and also a house that actually would generate profit from rent. Yeah.
Right. What about you, Fabio?
Different properties all around the world, different environments, and then renting some of them,
yes.
making profit out of them while live on the other ones.
So whether you're in Seoul, New York, or Madrid, one thing is quite clear. Housing affordability is becoming a defining issue for many young people. And as rents rise and home ownership moves further out of reach, the search for a solution is more urgent than ever. And the question now is which of those solutions can turn the dream of affordable housing into a reality? And that brings us to the end of today's episode of News Generation, but News Gen will be back tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Korea time with more stories and discussions. A big thanks to Jessica.
Pleasure's always mine, thank you.
And also Fabio.
Thank you for having me.
And to our viewers, thank you so much for watching. And while housing may be expensive, staying with us here on News Generation will always be free. We are
News Generation.
It feels a bit off. You might even wonder if it was made incorrectly. Let's take a closer look. Its nose is naturally lifted. The ears are laid back, and it roars with its mouth open down to the finely detailed fangs. The beard flows back, and details around the eyes, mouth, tail, and feet are rendered, using the incision technique, bringing the piece vividly to life. On top of the lid, seated at